Imagine sitting in a dimly lit room late at night, the glow of the television screen flickering as an animated talk show host in a superhero costume asks his guest a question that makes absolutely no sense. There's a pause, too long to be comfortable, before the guest awkwardly tries to answer, only for the host to interrupt with something even more absurd. And then comes the voice. It's rich, deep, completely serious, yet filled with an undercurrent of ridiculousness. The voice belongs to George Lowe, the man behind Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the voice actor who turned a forgotten superhero into a cultural icon and the heart of Adult Swim's early days. For those who grew up watching his work, his voice wasn't just sound waves through a speaker. It was an experience, a signature of an era where humor was weird, experimental, and unlike anything seen before. George Lowe passed away at the age of 67, leaving behind a legacy that shaped modern animation, comedy, and the very identity of Adult Swim. His absence leaves a void, but his voice, his unmistakable, wonderfully bizarre voice, lives on. This is a tribute to the man, the legend, and the voice that defined a generation. Long before George Lowe became the voice of Space Ghost, before he helped redefine late-night comedy, he was just a kid with an instinct for making people laugh. Born in 1957, Lowe had a natural ability to find humor in the ordinary. He saw the world through a different lens, one where even the most mundane moments could be transformed into comedy. He had a talent for impersonations, quick wit, and offbeat humor, and it became clear early on that he was more than just funny. He was gifted. But becoming a voice actor wasn't a career with a clear path. It wasn't something people studied for or trained in like traditional acting. It was a world of chance, where the right voice at the right time could change everything. For George Lowe, that moment came in 1994, when he was cast as the new voice of Space Ghost. At the time, the character was nothing more than a relic from the 1960s. A forgotten superhero from an era of stiff, formulaic cartoons. No one could have predicted that this casting decision would change animation forever. Lowe didn't just revive Space Ghost, he reinvented him. His comedic instincts, his impeccable timing, and his unmistakable voice transformed the character into something completely new. A delightfully oblivious, self-absorbed talk show host. What started as an experiment soon became a cult phenomenon, paving the way for an entirely new genre of animated comedy. And at the heart of it all was George Lowe. When Space Ghost Coast to Coast first aired in 1994, it was unlike anything that had ever been on television. It took the familiar format of a late-night talk show, complete with celebrity guests, interviews, and quirky sidekicks, but placed it in the most unexpected setting. A bizarre animated world where a forgotten 1960s superhero had reinvented himself as a talk show host. The show blended real celebrity interviews with absurd humor, surreal edits, and moments of uncomfortable silence. Conversations were chopped up, rearranged, and transformed into something completely unpredictable. The guests often had no idea what they were getting into, and their bewildered reactions became part of the joke. It shouldn't have worked. But it did. And at the center of it all was George Lowe. His portrayal of Space Ghost was nothing like the original character from Hanna-Barbera's 1960s action-adventure cartoon. Instead of a noble superhero, Lowe's Space Ghost was clueless, egotistical, and wonderfully awkward. He was both the hero and the joke, a character who took himself way too seriously in a world that refused to make sense. Lowe's distinctive voice carried the show. It was a strange but perfect blend of confidence and absurdity. He had an uncanny ability to deliver completely nonsensical dialogue as if it made perfect sense, which only made it funnier. His deadpan delivery turned simple words into comedic gold. A single hello from Space Ghost, stretched out in just the right way, could be the funniest moment of an entire episode. It was all about the delivery, and Lowe was a master of it. if Space Ghost Coast to Coast had been just another oddball experiment, it might have faded into obscurity. But it wasn't. It was something much bigger. It was a revolution in comedy, a show that defied expectations and reshaped animation as we knew it. And at the heart of that revolution was George, Lowe's voice. His portrayal of Space Ghost, equal parts confident, clueless, and strangely menacing, was the glue that held the show's chaotic brilliance together. Without Lowe's effortlessly funny deadpan delivery, the absurdity of Space Ghost Coast to Coast might have fallen flat. Instead, it became the blueprint for a whole new kind of animated comedy, one that embraced awkward pauses, surreal humor, and the unexpected hilarity of characters taking themselves way too seriously. That formula became the foundation for Adult Swim, the late-night animation block that would go on to produce some of the most groundbreaking shows in television history. Series like Aqua Teen Hunger Force, The Brack Show, and Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, all borrowed from the comedic DNA that Space Ghost Coast to Coast had perfected. Without George Lowe's voice, Adult Swim might never have existed in the form we know today. His performance didn't just shape a single show, it shaped an entire network's identity. Even after Space Ghost Coast to Coast ended, Lowe's voice remained a cherished presence in the Adult Swim universe. He appeared in commercials, bumpers, and special segments, almost as if the network itself knew it owed a part of its soul to him, and in many ways, it did. For many fans, George Lowe was Space Ghost. His voice defined the character, turned an old-school superhero into a comedic legend, and cemented him in animation history. But for those who knew him personally, he was something even greater. He was a storyteller, a natural comedian, a man who didn't just perform humor, he lived it. Lowe had an effortless ability to make people laugh. His humor wasn't scripted or forced. It flowed naturally from him, filling every conversation with wit and absurdity. His longtime friend, radio host Marvelous Marvin, called him the funniest man on earth. That wasn't just an exaggeration. Anyone who spent time with Lowe would say the same. His humor was infectious, his timing impeccable. He had a way of turning even the most ordinary moment into something hilarious. For over 40 years, Lowe and Marvelous Marvin shared an unbreakable friendship, constantly swapping jokes, riffing on the world around them, and finding joy in the absurdity of life. They borrowed jokes from each other so often that neither of them could remember who came up with what. That was the kind of humor Lowe embodied, spontaneous, effortless, and overflowing with warmth. But it wasn't just about making people laugh. Lowe had a rare gift for making people feel good. His presence was uplifting, his voice a source of comfort. Whether on screen or in person, he left people happier than he found them. When news of Lowe's passing broke, it hit hard. Adult Swim, the network he helped build, honored him by releasing rare footage from Space Ghost Coast to Coast's 10th anniversary celebration, a reminder of just how much he meant to the fans, the creators, and the world of animation. Fans flooded social media with tributes. Some shared their favorite Space Ghost moments, others simply posted clips of his voice, still making them laugh even now. There was a sense of loss, but also a sense of gratitude, because George Lowe left us with something special. His voice isn't gone. It's still here, in every episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, in every absurd interview, in every offbeat joke that still feels fresh decades later. It's in the DNA of modern animation, in the countless shows that took inspiration from what he helped create. It's in the memories of every fan who stayed up late, watching Space Ghost argue with a talking mantis, completely unaware that they were witnessing comedy history. And most of all, it's in the laughs. Because even now, even after he's gone, George Lowe is still making people laugh, and that's the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind. His impact on animation and comedy will never fade. But what made him so unforgettable? Was it his timing, his delivery, or simply who he was? And most importantly, who will ever match his brilliance?